Not that we go vote just for the presidential election, but that we go for our local communities as well.
Just to continue, or just one addendum to that point, does anybody know how many laws are passed federally every year? Like how many laws Congress and the president pass every year? It's one, and it's the spending bill, right? Some addendums get added on there, but no significant change comes from Congress and from the president. One law a year gets passed, right? We can get into like how are laws being written, but I feel like that's a topic for a different podcast. Do you know how many laws your state legislature passes every year? Right.
So before Hamza, you answer that, just so that our listeners know, the rest of us who are sitting here, now we're on a Zoom call, all three of us like either shook our heads or were silent because we didn't know the answer to either of the two questions. So I'm including Ishraq in that as well.
Bismillah, welcome to Savage Sufis. It's your main man, Wakil, and your other main man, Bilal. Yeah, you can take it from there. Back.
Good afternoon, morning, evening, whenever you're listening to this. So Wakil and I are here today, joined by our esteemed guests. In our previous podcast, we teased that we're going to have one guest on, but fortunately, we have two guests for you this evening. They're both really special. I go back a ways with them, and even Wakil goes back a ways with one of them. So our two special guests are Ishraq Ali and Hamza Abdulghani. So Ishraq, to give a little bit of background about him, he has experience in grassroots organizing, digital tools, civic engagement to build power in underrepresented communities. He's worked as an organizer for various civic engagement organizations, the New York Community for Change, Long Island Civic Engagement Table, LA County Bike Coalition, and most recently, he's been an organizer for the organizing director for Empower Change. And then along with him, we have Hamza Abdulghani. So I should say that Ishraq is coming to us out of LA, and Hamza is here in Massachusetts with me, and then Wakil is by himself in a room in his home. So Hamza is a former congressional staffer and campaigner. He spent his first year working in Senator Elizabeth Warren's Massachusetts office as a staff assistant, and he spent his second year working in DC as Warren's special assistant. Before leaving politics / government, he worked on Warren's Senate re-election campaign in 2018 on Democratic outreach, and this consisted of conducting research on congressional and gubernatorial races that had the potential to be flipped blue. So while I think Hamza was working on like pro-democratic stuff, we're not going to talk about this evening, or we're recording this in the evening. I'm sorry we gave it away. We're not going to be forcing a specific position on you guys, and nor are we going to be telling you exactly how to vote or whatnot, but we really want this conversation to be led by our two esteemed guests about civic engagement in general in the American community, and then also Muslim civic engagement, and how we should be working towards, our political process from the perspective of our ethics and principles and morals as Muslims. So how about we just have Wakil, we have Hamza and Ishraq just kind of introduce themselves or say hi before we move on to our next segment.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm very happy to be on the podcast. I have been a listener since Bilal sent me the first episode last week, and you guys are doing great stuff so far. So I listened to it while working, and it's been I especially liked this week's episode, last week's episode, the last episode. So
yeah, thanks, Hamza. I know I've been pestering you to listen to every single one and ask for your feedback. And Hamza, earlier this week, he said I would explicitly not like to be featured on the podcast with my feedback, but then I convinced him because of my convincing powers. So Ishraq, then we have Ishraq.
Hey, assalamu alaikum everyone. It's Ishraq. Not to be outdone by Hamza, I too have been listening to this podcast since, actually, because I listen to all my podcasts on Google, it takes a little while to propagate on Google Podcasts, but I did catch episode 1. I think I missed the last episode. And alhamdulillah, I'm actually very excited about the thought and the kind of process and the way that you guys are pushing conversation. So I'm blessed to be in company with y'all.
And even if you guys don't like the content, I think we're a very good or easy podcast to listen to go to sleep. I remember when we released the second one, it was like around midnight. So I just played it and lulled myself to sleep listening to Bilal's smooth voice.
I was just thinking, Bilal has a voice for podcasting, 100%.
I also kind of have a face for podcasting, but that's beside the point.
I was going to follow up with that. But.
Okay, so that we move along quite quickly because we have various sorts of listeners and various lengths of attention spans. We want to make sure that we captivate our audience. So what we wanted to do is to start our conversation. What we really want to have happen is Ishraq and Hamza kind of lead our conversation, and Wakil and I will kind of interject whenever we have questions and want to continue the conversation, because this is at least out of the realm of my expertise, and I will completely admit to my simple ignorance, and hopefully not a compounded ignorance, going back to our last podcast if anyone wants to listen to that one. So there's an American-born Muslim scholar out of the West Coast, out of the Institute of Knowledge, Sheikh Farhan Zubairi, who's very well admired amongst his peer circles. He wrote a short blog post earlier this week about how Muslims should engage, or his thoughts on Muslim engagement into the political process. And we're going to take a brief snippet from that, and I'm going to read it out to you, and we'll link it in the show notes or the episode description. And what we're going to have happen is Ishraq and Hamza will kind of offer their thoughts on that, and then we'll move on to the next section, inshallah. So the snippet from Sheikh Farhan's article is, he says, "I believe it's time for us as a community to come together and build a grounded, robust, and nuanced framework for participating in politics that allows us to stick to our religious principles and values. Someone, I don't remember who, shared that as Muslims, we should stay out of party politics and focus on specific policy issues. Sister Nuruddin Knight from the Fig and Olive blog said it beautifully. No political party deserves our loyalty. When they work in our best interest, we support them. When they don't, we don't. It's that simple." So what I'd like to do is, open up the podcast for, let's go with Ishraq first, since he's our senior. He's our elder in knowledge and expertise. Perhaps you can offer your thoughts on Sheikh Farhan's statement or that snippet of his article. And then Hamza, feel free to engage, because we want to keep this conversational.
Sure. I don't think I have. Hamza's put in the work the last several years on the campaign, so I know he'll have a bit more insight. I think this quote really stuck out to me, and maybe this speaks a bit to like the kind of the world of how I was introduced to civic life and public life. There's like a very strong and intentional like discipline and discourse around what it means to participate in like a civil democratic society. And that is built on the foundation of folks understanding that there's public life and there's private life. I think for the Muslim community, there may be that line is blurred, or folks have not seen that articulated in that way. But in this kind of pre-existing discourse around like, public life that exists, it's necessitated by special interest groups or civil society groups that are not loyal to a party. They're loyal to the individuals, or they will be motivated to support individuals or institutions that reflect their values or their issues. Like the simplest way to look at it is like, if I was a labor union or a union working on the docks, and I'm literally pulling this from like The Wire, for example, season 2, right? Like you got like the dock workers that are, lobbying to make sure that there's not new developments coming in at the dock so they won't lose their jobs. So therefore, if they have a position on a specific issue, they're going to be working with the candidates or the elected officials that support their issue. And so when Sheikh Farhan is mentioning this, that's what this completely resonated with me, that every community should understand and be able to articulate what their self-interest is. These are the issues that are important to us, or these are the positions that we want to adopt. And then they use that as a lens to operate and engage with elected officials or government agencies or institutions. So that's what really stuck out to me. And I'm curious, Hamza, you're on the other side of this. Love to hear your take.
Yeah, so I to be clear, I used to be on the other side of this before I walked away from this sector of I don't know, industry or whatever you want to call it. But I think that Sheikh Farhan's point is really, really strong. He's also like, the fact that he quotes Sister Nuruddin Knight is evident that he's not the first person to make it. Sheikh Dawood Walid has also made this point in a different way. I think that it's really important for Muslims in America to understand this in order to preserve what we would call the middle way. And we can get into that a little bit more, but there's been a lot of, because of what has happened to us, in the 90s and post 9/11, we've been, not necessarily great at sticking on the middle way for very like unblameworthy reasons. There's nothing that was done that was like nefarious, right? It's just sort of how humans react to events and things tends to not be well thought out. It tends to be reactionary. So there's, I think this line of thinking from Sheikh Farhan, from Sister Nuruddin Knight, from Imam Dawood, this is like we're trying to recalibrate ourselves. And so, what Ishraq has said is completely in line with what they're saying, and completely in line with I think what the vision for political engagement in America should be.
Yeah, I just kind of thought about what you just mentioned, that, like the 90s moment and 9/11 as well. And it may have a different meaning for me because I may just have a few years on you, but like the idea that, if I saw Muslim activism growing up as a kid in New York pre 9/11 as being very like, maybe single issue focused, if it's around activity overseas, and then kind of seeing that, the consequence of that may be situations where like Muslims that are politicized around issues overseas may be criminalized here in the United States. And that kind of really broke our political engagement. And what that means is that left a vacuum for like, how are Muslims going to live out their values if they're realize their political values in this space, if they're going to be criminalized for it. So I think that like definitely left a weird taste in folks' mouth. And I can speak to my own experience that, when I first entered into organizing work, it was with non-Muslim organizations, because I didn't find a Muslim organization or vehicle that was able to speak, quote unquote, unapologetically, or like very like directly challenge the system in a way that like another immigrant organization or like a civil rights organization or a labor organization would be able to press for. And so what that meant is that, the middle way is alive and well. And people may say that it's apolitical, with like, folks within the middle way of like the Muslim tradition in the States may have a lot of political opinions, or, have an idea, like a construct of how society should be, but seldom is it like kind of played out in civil society because of the fear of like the criminalization that happens. And I think about like, post 9/11, really kind of Muslims being scrutinized under like the national security lens. And then pre 9/11, it was like very single issue. And that's, again, my limited experience. And, probably in the 60s, 70s is a little bit different as well.
Yeah, also building off on that, pre 9/11, it's really fair to say that immigrant Muslims, immigrant and immigrant descendant Muslims voted more right-leaning because they were small business owners who wanted to get tax cuts or whatever it was. Like, there's the infamous story, and I think Sheikh Farhan mentions it in his blog post, that like the infamous story that Arab and Desi Americans voted for Bush Jr. because they were in favor of tax cuts, and Black Americans did not vote for Bush Jr. because Black Americans vote for Democrats. And so it split the vote. You even hear sometimes stories that like Arab Americans handed Bush Jr. the election by giving him Florida. Right now, this like let's not rehash like something 20 years ago about what happened in Florida and all that. But there is a really strong argument that like pre 9/11, the Muslim community was a lot more divisive, even if their political like what they cared about politically was not fleshed out.
Okay, so do you mind if we take maybe a step back? Because I think, although I'm trying to really follow the conversation that you guys are having, because for someone like me who is, my political acuity is basically as obtuse as it can get. For me, like, say like a practicing Muslim who really puts like whatever Muslim values forward, and I know that the scope of my purview has to be kind of widened. I remember during the 2000 election where my dad was saying, because I wasn't old enough to vote until 2 elections later, I remember my dad saying, yeah, the Muslims are going to do a block vote for Bush Jr. And I was like, why are we going to do that? Why are you all going to vote for Bush? Like at that point, I didn't really have beyond a middle school education about political parties and government and whatnot. I was like, when someone's father started a war again, basically against Muslims in Muslim majority lands, like, why are we going to try to put someone who has basically the same ideology back in office? And I feel as though like what you just said, Hamza, about like how the Muslim community was divided, even though they weren't politically organized, how for a very, very lay person, how the two of you like break down like a little bit of what you had mentioned? Because it seemed as though like I was trying to follow as best as possible, what you're saying, but I felt like I was getting lost, and I don't want to call it the jargon, but how do we go from, for a simple person thinking that, oh, I should vote for a specific candidate because they have, I align with certain political positions that they're taking. How do I go from that sort of mentality to really looking at issues that each party or each candidate or each like different political platform is like pushing forward, and how can then I work with the rest of my community to get them on the same page of like supporting a platform as opposed to supporting an individual or supporting a party? Because what has happened, what I noticed, is that like we went from voting Republican, like Muslims majorly went from voting Republican for President Bush Jr. to basically wholeheartedly voting for Barack Obama in the 2008 election. And then now we're again kind of split because the Muslim community, where as someone approached me a couple of years ago, said that like we're fiscally liberal, but we're socially conservative, and we kind of fall in this like middle place, but I kind of still don't know what to do. That was a super long-winded question.
So the good news is that Muslim Americans aren't the only people feeling this way. That like I aligned with some of this thinking and some of that thinking, right? The good news is that the majority of the country is not fully aligned on a left-right dichotomy, even though it feels that way. And it feels that way, it should be noted, because we're so plugged into the news. But the majority of people really are actually independents who pick and choose their policy or their policy positions that they favor, right? Their platform positions that they favor. In terms of how do we build a sort of platform block that the Muslims in America can aspire towards, Ishraq can probably answer that a lot more. But I would think that the problem is, my take is that the problem lies in the fact that nobody wants to do like the grunt work of building that coalition on a like local and state level, right? So I I was thinking about this before we came on, and one of the things I remember when I was still working in the congressional offices was my boss who hired me, I remember, pulled us in for a pep talk. I think it must have been 2016, maybe 2016 it had to be, right? And so not only were we involved with, we were sort of, to give a little bit of an idea of what I was doing that first year, is we were sort of Senator Warren's representatives when she wasn't in Massachusetts. So the citizens of Massachusetts would come to her office, would call, would whatever, right, and say, what is Senator Warren doing about this issue? What is she doing about that issue? And we were there to represent her views and to represent her as a senator. And this would happen also to go see, like, you know, hey, the hospital's opening a new wing that's dealing with opioid addiction. So you know, somebody who's a regional director of Boston was going to go to that, right? But part of that was we were really involved with the state parties, specifically the state Democratic parties, right? And nobody knows about this. Like, if you talk to Muslims in America, not a single one of them knows about their state parties or even their local parties, right? The Democratic Party is not just a national, like, behemoth, right? It breaks down into the state party, which is where we get our delegates from, right? Everybody wants to complain about the delegates voting one way or another. They come from the state parties. They're elected by the members of the state party. So you have to be enrolled in that state party. And that even goes down to a further level to a local party. So Bilal, the town that you live in could have a local Democratic and Republican Party, and you are able to sign up there and work in that, right? Work towards pushing their agenda. The reason I bring all of this up is because in 2016, my boss tells me this story that back in, I forget what year, right, the Massachusetts Democratic Party was setting its agenda for what the platform is going to be, right? And they said, we are putting on our platform for the state, not for the country, for the state of Massachusetts, the legalization of LGBT unions or civil unions or whatever it is, right? And the reason why my boss was telling me this is to really impart on how important the Massachusetts agenda was, the state party platform was, because he said a year later or 2 years later or whatever it was, the national party accepted that as its platform, as part of its platform. So everybody wants to think about getting involved on this massive federal national level, and nobody realizes that so many of the initiatives come from your local and state level, right? And it's so much easier to be involved on a local state level and push agenda that way. That then makes it to the national level. And I'm not even saying go join your state Democratic Party or state Republican Party, but there are organizations that are pushing for things that Muslims should care about, right? Like Ishraq can speak a lot on this, right? We know people who are working for organizations that advocate on these things, right? So it's the reason why it's like a dissatisfying answer for so many people, because we're so enamored with federal politics, with national politics, right? And the real reality is, like, no, shut up about that stuff and go to your town hall or your city hall and figure out, like, what's going on in your own town and your city, right? That ends up being much more impactful to you and your family and your community than if you were to go to, you know, the Democratic convention every 4 years.
Yeah, I think that's actually really important because every 4 years we have this large scale election when we're electing the president. And a lot of people forget that the congressmen and the senators and our local officials are actually people that we have more of an influence on, right? Because once it goes to a state level, or sorry, rather a federal level, the state's already pretty much decided which way they're going to vote, right? With the electoral college, other than the swing states where that's where the votes really count for, especially during a major election. And I think in the 4 years that we get these major or big elections where we're electing the president, this topic comes up. And that's one of the main reasons why we're having the podcast today, is that there's this new generation of Muslim voters that are coming up. And they attended some type of Islamic school or a madrasa where they are learning these type of values. Some of them are public and some of them are private. And now they come to this conundrum. This major election is coming up. Which way do I vote? Is it red or is it blue? Because unfortunately, as much as we want to say we're really more of a middle way platform, it comes down to these two big figureheads. And one is like, hey, I have more conservative values, so I should probably go a little bit red. But at the same time, blue values benefit me and my family. When we first came here, we took all the social benefits and so on and so forth. And a lot of people lose that idea or that fact that it's not really about when the president makes a decision. It's the lower levels that actually have a greater impact on our day-to-day lives that bring it all the way up to the president, that bring it all the way up to, you know, the voting scale. And that's where real civic engagement is actually really necessary. Not that we go vote just for the presidential election, but that we go for our local communities as well.
Just to continue, or just one addendum to that point, does anybody know how many laws are passed federally every year? Like how many laws Congress and the president pass every year? It's one, and it's the spending bill, right? Some addendums get added on there, but no significant change comes from Congress and from the president. One law a year gets passed, right? We can get into like how are laws being written, but I feel like that's a topic for a different podcast. Do you know how many laws your state legislature passes every year? Right.
So
It's
before Hamza, you answer that, just so that our listeners know, the rest of us who are sitting here, now we're on a Zoom call, all three of us like either shook our heads or were silent because we didn't know the answer to either of the two questions. So I'm including Ishraq in that as well.
Your state legislature passes numerous laws every single year, and then beyond that, we're not even talking about voting, left wing or right wing. Numerous states put up ballot questions that the legislature doesn't want to vote on for whatever reason, and it gets punted off to the people, right? So it's so funny because we talk about democracy and you hear some cynics say, oh, but do we really live in a democratic country? We don't have a real say. We don't have a real voice. In Massachusetts this year alone, there are 2 questions that you can effectively create a new law by voting on them, right? So if you really, like what Wakil was saying, you really want to impact lasting change, you need to go get involved on your state and local level. That's where the changes are actually happening, right? Maybe something will come from the federal, right? But it's really a once in a lifetime kind of a thing, right? They are not passing a lot of laws like in a very large time span, right? So just piggybacking off of you, Wakil.
So to answer one of the questions that I had written down in our little outline, or 2 of them, does my vote make a difference and does it matter? So what I'm hearing from you, Hamza, is that yes, it makes a difference and yes, it matters, but it's really contingent upon the level, right? What I hear you saying is that the local, the state level, the impact you can have just by your vote, just by actually filling out your ballot, is much more impactful than at the federal level. In these once every 4-year elections. So for those of us who are listening to this podcast, or those of us who are out there, whether you're Muslim or not Muslim or whomever, right? Whether you're white, black, brown, green, blue, or pale or translucent, as I know some people are basically translucent. I won't mention any names. Hamza's not one of them, although he's quite a pretty white Egyptian. The rest of us are pretty brown. So you should still try to be engaged. But then to carry on our conversation, then what would you say to those people who, okay, as of right now, we're coming up on this election, and in some states the voter registration deadline is still, like, I think in Massachusetts it's still, is it the 24th? So it's like tomorrow, this weekend.
Yeah, maybe it just 23rd.
Yeah.
I think you're right, actually.
So I got one on Hamza. You still have the ability to do that, but for those people who are considering, even right now, should I go ahead and try to make my voice heard at least in this election, and then looking forward to the future, get involved on a more local level? Would you say that that's something wise, or should we just like kind of throw in the towel for this?
I think it's something wise, right? Like I won't speak on like where we should try and get involved. I think that, or like which side. I think we should not pick a side. I think we should be open to engaging both sides. But I think A, it's not a bad idea, and B, at least on the surface, there is a huge potential to really wow some of these state and local politicians. I remember when I was working in Warren's office, very shortly after I started working, Trump got elected like literally 3 months into my first year, right? And then, I got a call from somebody at the mosque in Boston, the Islamic Society of Boston, cultural center, ISPCC, right? To like, we want to do an event where the senator comes and it's a big interfaith event about like how we're going to protect people and protect minorities and da da da. So I kind of help people in my office connect with the ISPCC about that. And I remember when I was talking to them about it, right? You have to understand, right? Like they're just looking for turnout, right? What's going to increase my turnout, right? So I remember they said, okay, what realistically, we went back and forth. Is this going to be, is she going to speak after Jum'ah? Is it going to be an event? What's the deal, right? And at first we're talking about Jum'ah, and they were saying, what's the typical turnout for Jum'ah, right? ISPCC, for those who don't know, it's like the largest mosque in New England, right? It pulls in a lot of people. It gets something like 1.5 to 2,000 people each Friday, right? Which isn't like the largest number for Jum'ah, but it's still 1.5 to 2,000 people. I remember I dropped that number and I lowballed it because I wasn't sure, and my boss's jaw nearly dropped. And it's like, you can go to your masjid. Can you imagine if you were to go into the masjid, right, and just pull in your local state senator or state congressman and be like, I can get you 1.5 to 2,000 people and put you in front of them, right? These people are like, they want to be reelected, right? And any opportunity to speak in front of people, like the opportunity to just like really, really make an impact, it's so available, right? Like subhanAllah, Jum'ah is there and hundreds, if not thousands of Muslims show up, and these politicians are like salivating at like the opportunity, right? And nobody's been wise enough to say, hey, why don't we just like do this? Why don't we just invite these politicians and say, I care about gun policy, I care about healthcare, I care about, whatever. And like, it's going to take people who are really, really, really savvy and know how to tiptoe around certain issues. But the opportunity, like, we have such an exaggerated like footprint at that stage, right? Because frankly, we don't represent like more than probably 10% of the population, right? And so the fact that we can make that much of an impact in some really big states, really important states, that's like, there is a big opportunity there.
So then let me throw it to Ishraq, because something that I had asked him was like, how do I actually go about, making my voice heard? So how do we take that potential that Hamza was just mentioning for like something like Jum'ah or like a Friday halaqah or something like that from our local masajid, that, for the larger ones, and I know that, so for Boston, 1,500 to 2,000 is really big. And there are states out there that could be swing states where your masjid might hold many more people, right? For Jummah. I mean, not necessarily nowadays with COVID, but you can still get the word out. How do we capitalize on that and then make our voices heard? And how do we, bring the power to us as opposed to we're just listening to politicians talk? I think this is something that you and I basically discussed a little.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And Jazakallah khair, Hamza. I think the points that you were reflecting on is like, it rings true in what Wakil is mentioning. And I'm just going to rehash some of those things to build towards what Bilal is going at. One thing is, from the grassroots organizing perspective, all politics is local, right? Like Hamza just illustrated that, one law is passed at the federal level. Every decision that our community, if we were to do like a quote unquote, like introspective listening session or a conversation at the mosque to find out what folks care about, chances are it'll probably be something around like bullying at school, or that public transit's not working in my neighborhood. Like all these kind of ho-hum, like really boring issues, quote unquote, that are not sensationalist, that don't pop up every 4 years. Those are the issues that are like really animating and like should be informing how people participate in their politics. But if you approach politics with the idea that, I have this one savior elected official, or this candidate's going to solve everything, without even being able to articulate that, it's problematic that every time we apply for a zoning permit to build a minaret, the city shoots us down. If we are informed by that issue, rather than saying that, it's like Bilal Smith, who's like got a family-friendly name, but he's actually conservative and he hates minarets, he's the guy that's shooting it down. Like, we want to understand that the issues that are impacting our community should be driving our engagement. And that's one perspective, like slightly different from what Hamza was mentioning, that, like we see from the grassroots organizing perspective, not what's going to turn that elected official out to come towards us, what's the issue that this elected official can really turn the key on. And that requires work. And that's the grunt work that Hamza was mentioning, that, the idea of like throwing in the towel right now doesn't make sense. But what it reflects is that our community was not engaged in politics in the 4 years leading up to this. Trump got elected in 2016. Man, this really sucked. 2017, the Muslim ban happened. But between 2017 to 2020, every organization or every community should have been thinking through that, like there's tax cuts that are now impacting our community, or there's, a rise in Islamophobia, the way that law enforcement is targeting us or whatever it is, like having established a platform of what those issues are. So this is kind of like to me, it's indicating that we need work. People should remember with a feeling right now that, hey, like we're like in a position where neither candidate reflects us, but we can't articulate why neither candidate reflects us, apart from like, really broad issues. Oh, he's pro-Zionist. Oh, we don't agree with him on LGBTQ. Oh, he's funding like Iran or whatever, like, whatever the kind of broad abstract issues are. That to me reflects that, hey, we need to do the groundwork and the grunt work of being a bit more educated on our issues. But all that being said, driving back to what Bilal was mentioning, how do you, if you have a potential base of a mosque, how are you in like a swing state, or it doesn't really matter because most of us are not in swing states. I'm in California, where literally Hamza was mentioning, I have 20 like ballot propositions in this election that's coming up. That's going to impact how my tax dollars are going to be used for public schools if I want to raise a family here, how it's going to impact, the ability to vote for felons, how it's going to impact like gig workers, all these things that are happening at the hyper local level. And like, I got to be on the ball and be aware that what's my position on these issues, especially if it's impacting me or the community. So all that being a very long-winded way of saying that when you're at a mosque, one of the first things that you actually want to do, if you're in a position of leadership in your community, you actually want to have intentional conversations, structure it so that, post Halakha, that we want to have an elected official come through at the end of the year in December, but we start in August, like every Friday from August to December, we're going to have like, community town hall sessions where people get a chance to talk about the issues that are bothering them. I'm unemployed because of COVID. Oh, I can't get healthcare for my parents because, the Obamacare is going to be repealed or whatever it is, or like, public transit's not operational in my neighborhood. Once we've kind of built out, after doing that intentional grunt work, like, it's going to be hard getting only 10 people to come to that first meeting on a Friday, then the next meeting maybe 20, and it gradually grows. But then you've actually established a platform of issues so that when you actually have an elected official come to your space, it's going to be more than a photo op. It's like, hey, that's great that you came to Jummah to talk to us, but we actually have a laundry list of issues. Do your photo, talk to the folks at Jummah if you want, but we got to have a 30-minute conversation or an hour conversation before or after that where we get solid commitments for you on it. And so that just requires that grunt work or homework that needs to be there. A lot of, again, this kind of knowledge and this kind of infrastructure exists in a lot of other communities. And this community organizing structure is something that's not new. It's new to our community, perhaps as immigrant, second wave Muslim community that has not been engaged in activism. And I'll give like a laundry list of like books to read, just so that there's homework that needs to be done. We need to understand our position as a civil society organization in the history of this country, of how folks have organized. Our narrative may not be that we're represented by the parties, but hey, we have a lot more in common with farm workers and with labor workers and like civil rights organizations that have been fighting for rights. And we have to kind of understand that historic trajectory as we continue our engagement. I'll stop. That was really long.
No, that's fine. You keep on going. That's why we invited you here, right? I think also another thing that's very jarring is just interacting with the ballot. I think the first time for myself, when I decided that, I have this right to vote, I'm going to use it. And I went to go vote for my local community member or whoever it was. There were so many other positions and names that I didn't even recognize or didn't even know they were going up for election. And then they give you the 2 questions on the back, right? That's actually going to be like part of your community or local law or even city law. And when you realize that there's so many people going up for all these different positions in the different counties and local governments and so on and so forth, you realize there's a lot of place where we can actually do our work. And a lot of people don't realize that. And I feel like when they are going to go to the booth this year and they're going to vote, or rather next month, they're going to see that there's a lot of places, a lot of positions, a lot of things that no one's talking about. It's not just Trump and Biden, right? There's going to be a lot more other names on that list. And in addition to that, sometimes people are unopposed. And that's even more insane, that somebody's been in a position that had so much impact. 30 years they're going strong. No one's trying to go against them. I remember there was a judge, one of our county judges, I think. He was unopposed completely. Muslim guy, alhamdulillah. He seemed like a decent dude from after I looked him up. But I didn't know he was going up on the ballot. That could have been somebody else who wanted a chance, you know what I mean? And that's really important, that we have to start showing our local people that that there's ways that you can yourself be empowered to become a politician yourself if you want it. If not, you want to take a back seat or you want to help make policy, you can also take that opportunity as well. And a lot of people, like we said, we go back to that middle way politics that kind of is our way of life pretty much, because we are the middle nation, is that I don't necessarily have to vote for those people who are choosing different party lines, so on and so forth. I can be that almost independent or a different type of leaning or my own mix of politics, and that can push me and my people to a place of power. And people kind of forget that there is a political aspect to Islam, right? We're not talking about, different organizations around the world, but there is a way of gathering people, understanding their vote. One of the first things Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam he did when he entered into Medina was take a census, right? To understand what type of people are there mixing, what are their needs, what are their concerns, and how we can address them. One of the things was, hey, we need clean water or water that our people can drink. And that's when the famous incident about buying an entire well for the community. And that engagement, taking in the people's wants and concerns, is something that we need to translate over, maybe because we are the children of immigrants, many of us, right? Many of us are children of immigrants, and that's why we're kind of afraid to engage in politics because our parents never did it, or maybe one generation is like my uncle, he did vote for Bush the first time. So that was like the only instance where I saw one of my own relatives vote for somebody, but nobody else did it. And then I wasn't ready. I wasn't old enough to vote for Obama the first time. And then the second time I was like, you know what, forget it. But now there's a new generation, they're also ready to vote. And then they're also ready to stand up and do all that engagement. But the main point that I'm trying to get to is that each one of us, or whoever is listening, and this talk is kind of inspired by one brother that goes to one person or another, and we can be that person that we want to embody, right? That we're looking for in somebody else, right? We're looking for that knight in shining armor, but right now he's not available, or she's not available. It could be us, right? We just need to engage.
Yeah, I mean, Wakil, 100% agree with you on that. The other really interesting thing is you bring up the local level politicians that nobody knows about. The interesting thing is that the local level districts are not always, because we have gerrymandering problems, but tend to be way more diverse than just simply red and blue, right? I live in a county where one city is a blue city, and the entire suburban area is like the red stronghold of Massachusetts, right? So, and I live in the suburbs, so I'm seeing the Trump signs and the whatever, right? And it's just like there is a potential for someone to be a like moderate candidate in a like state legislature or a whatever local and state position, right? Because we can appeal to those things. So just going back to the point is that like there's much more richness on that state and local level that people don't realize, and that richness allows for more nuance, more diversity, and we're talking diversity of thought, not diversity of like ethnic background or whatever, right? But just a diversity of where you come from is a lot easier on a smaller localized level.
So Hamza, maybe we'll also open this up to folks. So what would we recommend, or what would we do to build power, or to kind of be engaged in our neighborhood, or in our political district? What would be step one? Or what would be a couple of steps?
I think step one, honestly, it would probably be similar to what you were saying of a community town hall. But I think more important than that is like civics class, like, right? Like 50 years ago, right? You go to public school and you were taught this is why it's important to vote. This is why it's important to be engaged. This is why it's important to whatever, right? And I think not only American Muslims, I think Americans in general have lost sight of that. So I think the most important thing, you need to teach a civics course, and that's the big problem with that is you're gonna get some nerds like me that are gonna be like, oh, civics, cool, right? Like, or like, oh yeah, I'll read that stuff, I love that stuff, right? But then like everybody else could be like, what the hell is this? What do I care, right? So you need to find a way to make it engaging, and I think the best way to make it engaging is to point out that from a historical perspective, the way to engage the Muslim community, I think, is to always bring it back to the Muslim community, like center it on us, right? And so you can very easily say something like, the founders and early observers of American democracy pointed out that this democracy will only work when ethical, moral, religious people keep their faith. Right, so you build a model of civics based off of your religio moral model, right? That's just me spitballing right now, but
I mean that's
step one.
That feels right to me. Like the things that I'm hearing, it's like, hey, like if whoever is listening or whoever is in this, like and there's honor in both being a leader and a soldier or a follower in this. So if you want to take the responsibility of like, building like political power in your community, one, you actually got to take that civics course. You literally got to power map and understand what decisions are being made. I'll give you an example, like literally in Long Island, in one of the towns that I was organizing in, we found out that the city, where there was a predominantly Black and Latino community, the streets were not being paved properly. And this is the town of Islip, which is actually pretty well off. But the other parts of the town have their streets paved, got like, re-tarred and all that. Like we figured out who was actually responsible for it. Was it the county or the town? And that's what we call power mapping. Just kind of understand who's responsible for the decisions that are impacting you in the kind of everyday things. And that it's boring, but you got to know that. And then the second piece is you actually should learn and press it upon yourself to understand the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. When Wakil is mentioning that he did like a kind of a census of the community around him to understand like, hey, what were people's needs? Then you'll actually understand that there's no difference with politics and religion, right? Like part of our deen instructs us to be mindful of like how we're like running a smooth society, for lack of a better word, whichever way. And like we draw lessons from like, things even from before the Prophet said, even it's called to prophecy with the Hilful Fudul, right? Like he said that if I were called to like an agreement like before Islam, it would be this thing, because it made sure, and I'm paraphrasing, so folks don't take it for verbatim, but like, if there was something that was calling for the justice and the rights for others in my time, I would still call for that.
Can we just define what the Hilful Fudul was?
I'll defer to you or Wakil to just speak to the pact and agreement, because I think there's a story to it, right? That
I just don't remember the English translation to it.
Oh, I don't even I don't even remember what the concrete translation of it is, but it basically was an agreement when there was a man that came in and had a grievance against one of the leading Quraysh men that he wasn't receiving his dues for like a trade that he had made. And he was asking, will not anybody stand for justice for me? And then the leading Quraysh said that, hey, like if folks are coming in here for pilgrimage, we actually have to make sure their rights are being honored and protected. And so it had multiple names as far as I remember, and Hilful Fudul is one of the names.
Yeah, that's basically all so that our listeners have an understanding of what who are not familiar with the seerah, who need to acquaint themselves with the seerah, which is the life and biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So then they can kind of go back and visit that specific incident of his life. But continue on, Ishraq, because I was going to ask this question of like the mixing of religion and politics, but you kind of like intertwined it, so I could just like sit back and listen to you guys.
Hey man, that's like a mass Boston kind of like.
Let's not bring that up. You're lucky you're in California. When you mentioned the fact that you have 20 ballot propositions to look at, I was like, alhamdulillah for only having to ask my friends about 2 or 3 because
Hey.
and like now it makes me reconsider wanting to move to California. If you don't want to vote, if you don't want to have your vote count, then go somewhere where the ballot questions don't count.
I mean, it just requires people to be active, right? Like, to be honest, right? The night that I was filling out the ballots, it took me like 2 hours. My wife's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm just like, "Yeah, like I'm literally researching every single ballot initiative right now." And then, within our Muslim community, several folks just took their time out to kind of build primers on Excel spreadsheets, compile all these rules. And that's part of the grunt work that needs to be done for us to be like an informed electorate base. So I'm just going to shortcut to some recommended readings because I feel like election year or not, like we have to build our kind of like energy of why we're doing this. So that way we're not in this existential crisis, like every 4 years, should I vote? Should I not? Read Towards Sacred Activism by Imam Dawood Walid. Read Going Public by Michael Geekin. Read Blessed Are the Organized by Jeffrey Stout. Read Rise Up by some Pico guy. I can't remember this or the organizer's name. And there's probably one more organizer book, but at least like Towards Sacred Activism is like literally a start for Muslims to understand how to engage politically. Going Public helps us understand a little bit of like engagement is beyond 4 years, is beyond every election year. And then Blessed Are the Organized is really understanding how faith communities reacted to Katrina. So it's none of these like kind of sensationalist issues, but we had a life or death situation with a hurricane where communities were displaced. How did church communities respond to this? And these are things that should inform us as an educated Muslim base of how we engage in politics.
Okay, awesome. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna have Ishraq give us that list of books, which is probably a list of books that's longer than a number of people who have read ever since they graduated high school. And I know that Hamza, he also had a book recommendation or 2. So if you want to add to that list, you can mention it for those listening, and then we'll also add those to the show notes or to the episode description. But I'll let you say that, Hamza, or I'll let you mention those, and then Wakil, what do you think if we have some closing thoughts from both of our guests, and then we'll wrap it up because we don't want to go on for too long, and I know that I talk a lot. I really enjoyed this, although some of it kind of went over my head. So I'm gonna listen to our podcast.
Yeah, in terms of some books to add on, I would say something that I'm like in the process of reading. I've read snippets of it, but I need to really do a deep dive. Would be Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. It's Alexis de Tocqueville was like a French aristocrat who kind of visited America in the 1800s and said, "I'm going to do a survey of like how democracy is turning out." And there are some really insightful passages in there about how this grand project, right? Like, and this is like our great myth that we're embarking on this grand project of like self-determination and everything is really only possible by a people who are ethical and good, and like ultimately his point ultimately rooted in some form of a religious good, right? So there's a big opportunity there for people of a religious background to really feel a sense of civic belonging to this country. I would say it's massive. It's not always going to be an easy read, but this is like you got to go back to the source, right? The other book I would recommend, I would highly recommend Towards Sacred Activism. It's very short. It's like 75 pages and it's packed full of wisdom. And then finally, the book I would recommend, I just finished reading The Benedictine Option by Rod Dreher. It's Rod Dreher is a bit of a conservative and kind of a bit of a firebrand, so don't follow him wholeheartedly, but he has a really good book on building community in America for faith communities in an America that is no longer faith-based. There is one more book. This is less so about civic engagement and more so about I guess you could say like the flaws with both sides. It's Patrick Deneen's Why Liberalism Failed. It presents a really good critique of the right-left dichotomy, and in a sense also in its critique there is a sort of I'd say you have to understand that critique in order to really decide that, like, I'm going to be policy based, I'm going to be issue based. So yeah, those books.
Yeah, so I think another thing is that some people who might be listening is, what should we do at the ballot that's coming up? And you know, I think, at least for my recommendation, is if you have the right to vote, take it, right? Just don't let it squander it away. If it's your first time voting, you're gonna learn a lot just by going to the booth. You're gonna learn a lot by seeing the ballot. And even if you don't agree with red or blue, there's a write-in option that most people don't know about, where Harambe became president almost last time. And that experience in itself is actually very important, and it's gonna help you engage more with like American politics down the line, and our local politics and all that stuff. So I remember when Trump was first running and against Hillary, and everyone was trying to say, who should we vote for? And everyone made this argument of the lesser evil. So in this case, we're not going to tell you vote right or left, or not to vote at all, but I would say, just follow your heart. Every person, if you're going to say, hey, I want to go for more conservative values, I want to go for more liberal values, I want to go for XYZ, vote what you think is best, but don't throw away that vote this time. Just put in something if you want to. So there's no real answer, right? You're not going to get a real answer who you should vote for, because it's sometimes very personal, right? It's almost like choosing a spouse for 4 years. And we all know how difficult that it is just to live with one for even 1 day or 1 year. So
you guys can speak to that more than I can, or at all. And you could also just write in Wakil Rahman Mia for president.
Throw my full government on for the ballot. Oh. That's great. That's all right. So yeah, that's my 2 cents for whoever's listening, for us to guide you who to vote for. There's no one we can really guide you to. Just follow your heart. I can argue both ways where one is the lesser evil, and that'd be a fun conversation too. And that's kind of devil advocate depending on which candidate you put. So
yeah, Wakil's got it right. We're not going to tell you who to vote for, right? We can't tell you who to vote for, but we are going to tell you to just go vote, right? Like, doesn't matter who you vote for, just go vote.
I would say pay more attention to what you're going to do after November 3rd. So one, I would recommend when you go vote, bring remind 3 other folks to go along and vote with you. Again, vote for whoever your instinct is, but then make a commitment to yourself to whatever resources possible. If you like reading, first book I'd recommend, just read Towards Sacred Activism. That'll at least give folks a common language within our tradition of how we should be engaged. And then the third step, so first step, go vote, bring 3 people along. 2, if it so behooves you, read Towards Sacred Activism or watch one of Imam Dawood's lectures on YouTube or Facebook around this book. And then 3, do a power map. Find out if your town or your city has like a city hall meeting or a town hall meeting. Just familiarize yourself with the agenda. What are they talking about? Do that. And then after that, hit up Bilal and Wakil, and they'll put you in touch with Hamza or me, and we can talk about more steps to imagine building power.
Yeah, we can definitely put you, we can give you their phone numbers, their addresses. I don't have access to either of your social securities, so, but no, of course, we'll, if anyone is interested, then we can put you in touch after you've done some of your own groundwork, because we don't want just random questions going and filling up the inboxes of our beloved guests. And I say beloved because you guys are actually beloved to me, because although it's been a while since I've seen the both of you, it's good to see you guys. I want to ask if you do want to share any final thoughts before Wakil and I close it out. Okay, so I just got of course, none of you can see, and maybe if this is how we'll close it out. Thank you for listening, for taking the time. And we went a little bit over the time that we had initially planned for, but I think this discussion is really, really important. And there's a lot here to unpack. So whether you listen to it at 1 times speed, 2 times speed, or 3 times speed, as I'm trying to listen to the things that I listen to, I think it's really important to talk about these sorts of things. And if you want to be able to see the reactions that some of our guests have, then you need to help support us, right? Whether that's by listening, by actually supporting with the $ support, or sharing, or in any other manner. We welcome your feedback, of course, as always, whether it's regarding something that we talked about here or a previous episode or something in the future. The upcoming episodes that we're going to be having, we're going to have a Halloween episode. You might be asking what Halloween is. Those of you who know, and those of you who don't know, it's good that you don't know. And then we're also going to, I think that episode, we're also going to be featuring, I didn't ask for donations, I asked for support. The best sort of support is your du'as, is your prayers, and your help. But yeah, the Halloween episode will be featuring our very own amateur exorcist, our very own amateur Raqi. So make sure that you listen to that at a time where you won't be scared. Okay, anything else before we actually really close it out?
If no one else loves you, I love you. That's the way we're gonna close it out.
Yeah, I can't say the same. All right, we will see you all next time, or you will hear us all next time. Take care.